What's up everybody, Hunter here, and today I wanted to take a look at the useReducer hook and how we can use it instead of useState when our state becomes a little bit more complicated. And I'll show you the benefits of useReducer at the end and why I like it over useState. So let's get into the code here. I have a create React app running. It's just bare plain create React app. Here is the app.js for it. I haven't touched it yet, and we have the create React app up and running over here. And now I'm going to clean it up a little bit by getting rid of the innards. So as you can see, the hot reloading is on, and we are going to start by let's start by using the useState first, because it's easier to understand and it's kind of like everybody's first hook. So we'll use the useState hook, and then we'll compare it to the useReducer little by little. So what we can do is, well, just import useState, and we'll do useReducer as well. Why not? So here's one useState, useReducer. I'm just going to comment this out for now. And so let's say we have a counter that we want to do, right? So the first one is the count, and the second one is the set count. And useState, you start with the initial state in here. So now we can do something like paragraph, and we can look at the count. And we have an error. Why? Because I did not close the p tag. Alright, so there's the count. Now let's put up a button on here so that we can add. And we'll give it a type of button and on click. We're going to set the count to count plus 1. Okay, this is very basic useState. And when we start clicking, can I zoom in here a little bit? Yeah. When I start clicking, we get the count, right? So how will we do this with useReducer? Well, let's check it out. So useReducer is kind of similar in that the first thing you get back is kind of like the state, right? So we can call this like reducer count. And the second thing is going to be a dispatch function. So this is a little different. This you can call whatever, I guess you can call this whatever you want as well, but it's normally called the dispatch. It's basically how you would call this to change this, the same way you call this to change this. And useReducer takes two things. It takes in a reducer function, and it also can take in the initial state, so we can make it like 0, just the same. And then up here, I usually like to put these reducer functions outside the body. So we can do a function reducer, right? And we'll be diving into more of this later. And the reducer, the first thing it takes in is we call it the count as well. Okay, and then we have to, actually let's just console.log the count and see what that even is. Oh, got the log, so now let's put the reducer stuff above this. Might look a little weird, but so this will be reducer count, and then we'll do the same button and we will put it right below there. So for the reducer, instead of the set count, we're going to do a dispatch. we're going to run the dispatch function that it gives us. And let's just see what it does, right? Let's just not pass in anything, and we're going to be exploring what dispatch does. So we can do add reducer, and maybe this is add state. All right. And then when we start clicking, all right, so we get some strange stuff happening. This first log here is going to be this console log, but then we don't return anything in this function. So then that makes this blank, and then it becomes undefined, and then that's where these undefined comes from. So let's try to return something from this function. We'll just return the count. And as we can see, count was 0, right? So this count 0 gets passed in here, and we're just going to return it. And let's give it a save. And as we do this, okay, we're just console logging the count, but we're not doing anything right now. We're not adding to it. So how do we add to it? Well, we can do return count plus 1. Okay. So now this is looking very similar to this, and it should just work the same. Cool. Right? And we're console logging that count here. And then this still works because it's like a separate state. Okay. So this looks kind of similar. The only difference is it has this extra reducer function. And this is what makes useReducer a little more flexible, because we can kind of do whatever we want to this. We can kind of just think of this as a normal function. The stuff you return in here is going to become whatever this is. So I usually like to call this a state, right? And then we can call all these things the state. And then this would be like your initial state. All right, so let's take a little closer look at the reducer function and the stuff you can pass into it. I think we're done with this useState example for now, because that was very easy. So I want to take a look more at this reducer function. So we can pass in the state. And so what if we want to subtract, right? What if we want to subtract? So this is add. What if we want to subtract? Well, we can do something like this. We can pass something else in. So let's take I'll just leave that there. And then we'll call this subtract. And we don't really need these anymore, right? So then, all right, so add, subtract is going to do the same thing right now, because dispatch is just one thing. So what if we pass in like an add, right? So this one we wanted to add, this one we wanted to subtract. Okay, so how do we get this value? Well, the first argument in the reducer is going to be the state, so this thing. The second one is going to be whatever we pass into the dispatch function. So these are normally called actions, right? So let's just take a look at the action. Action. All right. So now we should have two buttons. One's add, one subtract. So the add, we can see the action is that add string we put in. Subtract, we can see that now it's subtract, but it's still adding, right? So how can we make it actually subtract? Well, we can be like, if action equals add, then we'll return the state plus 1, right? And then otherwise, you can do like an else, but since there's already a return here, you don't really need that. So you can just return state minus 1. Okay, so now it's going to check on this action. If this action equals add, which is only this button, it's going to add. Otherwise, it's going to subtract. So we don't even really need the subtract here, but I'm just going to leave it because it's a little more clear. So now we can add. All right, it's add. And now when we subtract, we can see we're subtracting. Sweet. All right, so we can now make this reducer function more flexible. We can give it more instructions, right? I want to take this a little further, and let's say we want to add more things to this state. Maybe our state, our local state, consists of more than just a 0 for a number. Maybe we have like a input field, right? Maybe like a title. So what I like to do is I would like to call the initial state up here. I would like to make the initial state, and I want to make an object, right? Const initial state. Then we'll have the count, which is 0. So I'm kind of just moving this from here up to here. And then you can just pass in the initial state, which is now an object. And so that means this is now an object. So now we can't just do regular state, we have to do state.count. Okay? Because now everything has become an object. So we can add on to this if we want to. So this will be an object, which means we need to do state.count. And we need to now be returning an object, because if we just return this, it's going to be really weird. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now it's going to go to not a number, because at first we have an object, but then we return something that's not object. So we need to wrap these in little curlies, so now they're an object, and we need to return the count. Okay, same thing with this guy right here. Wrap them in curlies, make it a count. Okay, oops, size, here we go. So now this structure is matching the same structure we're returning. And this, every time we return this, this gets put into this, which is now rendered onto the screen. So now this should work normally. Okay, we got the add, we got the subtract. And then our count is now in this object. Cool. So let's say we want to add in like a title, which is a string, something different than a number, right? So we can call this like hello world or whatever. And now we want to, this is part of our state, so to access this we can do something like an h1. And then we can do, instead of state.count, state.title. Okay. And now hello world should show up, right? So that's this. So how do we edit like strings and text and stuff? Well, normally we just have like an input box. Just a div. Use a little div here, give it an input, type equals text, and then cool. And then we're gonna give this the value of state.title. Okay, so now we should have a little input box. It's a little small. I'm gonna just give it some styles here. Font size, maybe, I don't know, 16. Give it some padding. 6, does that make it? Okay, cool. So when we try to edit, I'm typing here, nothing happens, right? Because we haven't added an onChange to it yet. So this still works. Well, it's gonna break that because we're not returning some stuff. But I'll fix it in a second. So let's add an onChange, right? onChange is going to be in function, and then we're going to do the dispatch. So this does a dispatch, this can also do a dispatch. So we can just do this. So now we're at like a little, so we can say, what do we want to call this? Maybe like change text? Sure. Let's call it change text, right? So it's going to get a little weird, because we're going to have to add like another if statement. So let's just do it. If action equals change text, we're going to return. So we don't really want to do anything with the count, right? So we're going to skip that, and then we're going to make the title. All right, so how do we pass in the title? Well, we can't just pass it in like this. We need to kind of, and if you try to give it like a second argument to this dispatch, like if you try to give it another argument, like extra stuff here, the reducer function is gonna not care about this. It's only gonna have these two parameters pretty much ever. So if you pass in additional stuff, it's not gonna work. So how do we like pass in additional information? Well, we are gonna have to change this into an object as well, because then we can pass in additional information. So let's do that real quick, because we need to pass in like e, and then let's do like e.target.value. If we console log that, that's going to be the stuff we're typing in, right? So I'm going to just comment this out for right now. Comment this out for right now. So as we type, you can see it's trying to work, but we're not hooking it up yet. So we want to pass that e.target.value into our reducer function so it can actually do that. So how do we do that? Well, instead of passing in just one thing, we can pass in an object, right? So now we can say the type. So this now becomes the action. This whole object now is going to be the action. And then let's just say the type of this action is going to be change text. Okay. Now we can type in the value. Do value. And we can do e.target.value. Okay. So now instantly our dispatch is able to give more information to our reducer function. So now this will be an object. So let's change up these guys as well. So this is just like a one stringer type of thing. So we can do type add, right? And then we can do type subtract. So make this into that. Okay. So now instead of just doing action, checking on action itself, because an action is now so let's see what action looks like. Let's just take a look. It's going to start breaking, but action becomes this object. Alright? Which means we're going to have to check on action.type. Right? So now this should work again. So when we do the add, our title goes away, but I'll explain that in a second. I just want to show you that the add and subtract works. So, okay. So why does the title go away now? Well, because when we return this object, it's not going to auto-merge the title information. Okay? Our initial state is this, but when we return this object, we're only giving it the count. We're not giving it a title. So we could do like title equals like hello world, but the simpler way is to copy like the rest of the state into this. So you do that by doing the spread operator. So this one is basically saying like we only care about the count right now, and the rest of the state can stay the same. We're just going to make a copy of the rest of the state so that title won't disappear when we return it. So now when we do this, we hit the add, see how we have title preserved, and title is still now part of the state, which is great. And subtract works. But this doesn't work yet because we haven't hooked it up. And this is doing weird subtraction stuff because we haven't hooked up all the little edge cases. So let's uncomment this guy back. If change text, alright, so we want to preserve the count. So you want to copy the state. Like your state could be very big, so this is an easy way to just copy everything else, and the only thing you're going to change is the title. And then this is going to be action dot, what did we call it? Value, I think? Yeah, so it's going to be, the first one is action.type, the second is action.value, and we're passing this to here. Delete this guy. And now what I'm going to do, we're setting the title to action.value. Alright, and this is only if the type is change text. Got the dot type here. Alright, cool. So now this should start working. Sweet. Sweet. Alright, I can't spell sweet. Alright, whatever. you guys can see it working. And then the add is working, subtract is working, the input box changes is working, and as you can see, every time we're returning the stuff properly, everything is working. Alright, so now I'm going to delete these for now. So we have a nice thing going on here in that we have the state, we have the reducer, and you can see we have all these if statements, like if action type equals this, if action type equals this, otherwise return this. The better way to do it, instead of all these if statements, is to use a switch statement. And this is what you're going to see most of the time. Like, you don't have to use a switch statement, but it's what most people use, and it's going to make your lives a little easier. So you can do a switch, and how a switch works is you switch on the thing you want to check. So in this case, we want to do switch on action.type. Okay, and then these cases are basically like the if statement, and the default is like the last resort. So default, we're just going to return the state unaltered. Okay, so we're going to, let's move this up here so it's not grayed out. It's a little easier to see. So what is our first case? Well, we're already checking on action.type, so if it's going to be change text, we want it to, you can get rid of this break here, and you can actually put little curlies behind here, and then you want to return stuff here. Alright, so we're going to return, we're just going to copy the same thing, because that's what we need. So it's basically saying, okay, as action.type is change text, we're going to return this, the exact same thing as this if right here. This is just going to make things a lot cleaner in the future. So now let's do a thing for the add and the subtract. So add is going to look like this. We're going to return, let's just copy from here. Why not? And then subtract. And then it's going to be state.count -1. Alrighty. So now we don't need this at all anymore. I mean, these lines look, it's like a similar amount of lines, but this is just a little better than just doing ifs everywhere. Okay, and then the default is just going to return a state. So if it like has one that we don't understand, like if we pass in divide, there's no case for divide, it's just going to go to this default right here. So let's give it a save. Make sure it still works. Our add works, subtract works, this still works. Cool. Alrighty. Let's take another look at how, so another convention, you don't have to do this, but many people do, is to make these all capital, all uppercase. So subtract. And I kind of like this just because I can like easily glance at a file and find these easily. So I prefer to do this. You don't have to. These are just like rules some people follow. You don't have to. If you think it's weird, you don't have to do it. It's fine. So change. I'm gonna call this edit text actually. Because it's a little shorter than change. Gonna replace that up here. Alright, make sure it still works. Add, subtract. Alright. So, most of the time, this is what reducers are going to look like. A reducer takes in the state. This state is always going to be the previous state. So when you first start, state is going to be this. And as you change it, state is going to be the previous state. So you can do state.count, like +1 and -1. And the action is going to be whatever you pass in to the dispatch. We just happen to do an object because we can pump in more information into an object. So I like useReducer because when we have lots of stuff in our state, like maybe we want to get some data, right? And we have like a loading state, right? And then we have a data that we get all this stuff can be packaged nicely into the initial state and then the reducer, and it lives all outside of your component, which makes your component very clean. And if you were to do this using just useState, you would have like useState for one of the states, useState for count, useState for loading, useState for data. Like you would eventually have like 4 of these, right? And they would all be useState. Then you'd have like 4 different change functions floating around your file, which gets confusing. This way you only have one dispatch, and all it cares about is the type, and then that's all the instructions you need, and then everything else lives in here. So let's actually try to get some data. Let's try to get some data using this. So let's do a useEffect and get some data. Kick this demo up a little bit. useEffect. Okay, useEffect takes in a function, and we're going to do a fetch. And I'm going to use the JSON placeholder. Yeah, this guy down here. So this is just like a fake API. You can literally copy this code, and it's gonna give you some data. So to-dos, let's get like I don't want to show like 100 posts. Let's do the users. Let's do the users because there's only 10. All right, so we're gonna fetch the users, and then it's gonna console log it using the useEffect. So don't need this anymore. All right, so here's the console log. Let's go to the network and see what's happening. All right, when we first do a reload, this is the users, it's getting it, and then these are the 10 that we're getting, and here it is, console logged here. All right, so what if we want to display this now? Like, what if we want to set the user to our state and then display it on the screen? All right, so right here, once it's done fetching, you can do one of these. And here we would do a dispatch, right? We're not doing like a set data type of thing, we just do dispatch. And then the type, we can call this whatever we want. I just want to call it set data. And then the second thing we pass in is going to be the data. So it's going to be the JSON. Or call it data. Actually, I'm going to call this data. So then we can just, instead of doing data.data, you can just shorthand it like this. Right? So now, once it's done fetching at the end here, you should probably add like a catch at the end. But I'm going to skip that step. Let's take a look at what our dispatch looks like. So the dispatch is passing this. It's gonna look at the console.log action. Let's just take a look at what's happening. Okay, so I'm gonna reload. Okay, you see the type of set data, and we can see our data is getting passed in here now, right? Here's the array. So we can do this. We can add a new case. I'm just going to copy one of these guys. Delete this because we're not dealing with the title anymore. So we want to leave the state because we want to leave all the other stuff alone. And now we're going to do data. It's going to be action dot, what do we call it? Data, right? So it's going to be called action.data. You can call this whatever you want. And then this is going to be set data, because that is the type we're giving it. So it's going to know that, all right, when we see set data, we're just going to copy the other state because we want to keep it and just not change it. And the only thing we're going to change is the data. Going to give it a save. Now everything looks the same, but in the state here, let's take a look at what this guy looks like. So console.log state, right? Let me get rid of this so it's a little less confusing. And we can see what happens. Okay, Alright, this is good stuff right here. I'm going to do a reload. Okay, so this is the initial state, right? This part is this part right here. It's the exact same thing. And then when we get the data after we set it, the component gets re-rendered, and now we have access to data on our state. So we can do this. I'm just going to keep adding it to here. Why not? I'm going to do state.data.map, right? So, and then we can just do user turn a P. And let's take a look at what this actually is. Okay, so we have an ID, and then we have a name. So we're gonna make let's just give back the name, right? So every time you do a map on something, you want to give it a key. So the key will be user.id, and then the thing we want to give back is user.name. And now remember, our first initial data is null, so maybe let's just make it a blank array so we won't get like an error. Otherwise, it'll like freak out because you can't do a map on a null. So now it's gonna be, alright, so we get users right above here, right? So what about like a loading state? Let's add a loading state. So I already kind of started this, and the initial loading is false. So let's set it to true, alright? And we're gonna do something like state.loading. If state.loading, then we're gonna do like a, I don't know, double H1's never a good idea, so I'm gonna do this. Loading should not be an H1, but I just want to make this very noticeable. Alright, so let's do this. Okay, so loading is set to true initially, but then once it's done loading, I want it to set it to false. What you could do is you could set, when you do the dispatch here, you can send along loading, and you can set the false. You could do that, but since we know kind of like the structure of this is, we know that every time the set data is done, loading is always going to be false. So we can just straight up add it in here. So this saves us like a hassle of passing loading around, right? So we know that when it's set data, we're going to set loading to false. So now, alright, everything moves a little fast, but we can see the loading kind of goes away. So let me slow this down a little bit. Let's do slow 3G and see what happens. Does it look normal if I slow it down? Whoa, it's super slow. Alright, hopefully this will demonstrate it properly the first time, so we don't have to wait forever. Alright, so okay, loading is here, and then once it's done, boom, we get our list of contacts or users. Sweet. So the other perk of useReducer is you can kind of, if you know that like one state depends on another state, you can kind of group them together. And that is another benefit of useReducer. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That is the basics of useReducer. Keep in mind that the reducer function is just a function. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. There's like all sorts of reduxy things you can also do. Kind of like I think Redux calls it a higher order reducer. I actually made a post about higher order reducers. I'll link that up in the description. And it's kind of like an advanced way to use this reducer function to the next level by like reusing some of this stuff. And the other thing is, like, since these are kind of outside the component body, this reducer and this initial state, sometimes if this gets too gnarly and big, you can just take this out. You can like put it into a different file, right? And then just import those in here. And then your main component remains super clean. Like, this is all there is. And the only thing you have to worry about is the dispatch. So if you have child components, like let's say we have a child component in here, right? and the child needs to affect the parent state, well, instead of passing in, like, if you had useState, you would have like a ton of these changers. Instead of having many of them, all you would do is pass dispatch. You just pass in one thing. You just pass around this one thing, and then all the children can modify the parent's state. You just, use it the same way. It makes everything a lot cleaner, and that is the main reason why I like useReducer over something like useState. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was just a basic intro into useReducer. Let me know if this made sense, and let me know what other kinds of videos you would like to watch. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.